Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to me actually having decent audio. I am deeply sorry to everyone who was willing to suffer through that last video, but I am slowly figuring this whole audio thing out. Now, today I am doing something that I've wanted to do for a while. I'm actually really excited about it, even though it's a really simplistic concept. But we are going to be picking up book recommendations based on an aesthetics generator. Now, aesthetics are pretty well cemented in the internet at this point. They are basically it's a fancy word for style or vibe, but it's gotten really, really specific. And yes, you can find just rando aesthetic generators online, and I found one that thankfully doesn't just give you the word for the aesthetic, but it kind of explains both parts of the word. And while yes, a lot of these are going to be automatically generated, it is to a certain extent off of real aesthetics, or at least real aesthetic concepts. And I tried it a couple times on my own just to make sure that I could actually pick books that I've read based on these aesthetics. And admittedly, it's slightly hit or miss. There are times where I read the description and I instantly know what I want to pick for that. And other times I'm I can kind of guess the genre that might be. So we're going to see how well this works. I have so many books that I've never spoken about on this channel because they never ended up on a TBR and they weren't for a review. They were just a random book I read. So hopefully this series will help get some of those books spoken about a little bit more. Or more likely, I'll end up talking about the same review books constantly. We'll see. So I will have the link to the aesthetics generator in the description if you're interested in trying it out yourself. We're not taking this too seriously, but let's generate. I'm feeling 5. I think I can do 5 book recommendations per video. So let's get some generated things happening here. All right, I have the generator site pulled up on my laptop here, and we're going to go for 5 and click generate, and you are going to see my real reactions in real time, though I might have to go off camera to find the actual recommendations. Let's go. Generate. Okay. Okay. Ooh. All right. I'm already nervous about this. All right. First up, we have Rainbow Pop, which is not an aesthetic I've seen pop up in any of the times that I've tried this generator in the past. So for Rainbow, it has lots of colors, flashing lights, glowing pop, sometimes overlaps with rave and internet visuals. Pop is positive, enthusiastic reflections of rainbow. The rainbow theme stands out and is explored loudly and visibly. Oh wait, no, as I'm saying this, I think I do have a possible recommendation. Overlaps with rave and internet visuals. Is explored loudly. I might. Okay. Next one. Study aesthetic. Study, learning, school, organization, aesthetically pleasing imagery, note-taking, and studying. That just sounds like academia. Aesthetic is a catch-all term for expressing the study theme. Okay. So just studious, just academic. Okay. All right. Study style, because it had to give me 2 that were similar. Study, same as before, but style is a heavier emphasis on fashion. So we have one book that's just academia and another book that's academia but stylish. Okay. Next up, blood aesthetic. Blood involves blood, violence, mortality, darkness. Oh wait, I think I actually have that one. I have one for that too, maybe, and then aesthetic is just a catch-all. Actually, I think I do. Oh, okay, this might not be as hard as I'm afraid of. And then lastly, I'm not going to lie, this one feels too easy. We have witchcore, witch meaning herbs, animals, potions, magic, Halloween, darkness, spirituality, and old buildings. Old buildings, okay. And core, which means to embolden or uplift or otherwise bring attention to the overall aspects of the witch theme. Okay, so we have our aesthetics. I have never heard of any of these in standalone, but let's see if I can pull some book recommendations out for them. I am finally back, and I've learned that I need to give myself way more time to pick these out, because these prompts had me digging back through years of reading. I'm picking out books that I have not read since pre-pandemic. So I'm going to go with the obvious one. And it kind of feels like cheating because of how obvious it is. But we're going to start with the blood aesthetic prompt. All about blood and gore. And we're going to go with the very, very obvious prompt of Bleeding Earth by Caitlin Ward. I read this years ago. It is YA. I believe I gave it 3 stars. And this is for the blood prompt because it is literally about a flood of blood. For whatever reason, the book never makes it clear why, the world is flooded with blood. It just pops up out of nowhere and starts running through the streets. No one's sure where it came from. No one's died. There's been no massacres. But as the flood continues, it starts introducing new diseases, and different pieces of viscera are in the blood. And I'm remembering some scenes now as I say this, even though I read it so long ago. And and it is all about a teenage girl who is still coming to grips with her sexuality and wanting to meet up with her new secret girlfriend, and they're not out yet, and basically trying to find a way through the blood flood together to get where her father is. I forget exactly what her father did. I think it was some kind of like he worked at the dam, or he worked like somewhere where he would have the lowdown on the blood flood. I don't remember exactly what. I think I read this back in like 2019, but I definitely remember the viscera and the literal flowing blood down the street. So when I saw blood aesthetic, I was like, well, obviously. But I do remember feeling that this book was mid, and I don't remember why. It didn't bug me that it never explains the blood phenomena, because it was very clearly one of those, we are using this supernatural thing to examine human nature, because you see the looting and you see how things begin to deteriorate over time, and everyone's pretending it's okay, and that could very easily be a metaphor for how our protagonist was pretending everything was okay despite the fact that she has all of these secrets about herself. But that didn't bug me. I don't need the supernatural or paranormal phenomenon in all speculative books to be explained, because that's not the point of a book. These aren't scientific textbooks. But I definitely gave it 3 stars. I just went and checked. I've spent a lot of time on Goodreads this evening. I guess I just must not have been up for maybe the characters. I thought I liked the plot. I liked how it introduced all of the different problems that would come as the result of a blood flood, like water sources begin to become tainted because the blood is seeping into the groundwater, is seeping into wells, and so, bottled water begins to become hard fought over. I almost wish I hadn't unhauled this one after I read it, because now I'm wondering why I thought that, and I don't have the book to reread. That's kind of a bummer. Now I'm wishing I had written reviews for all of the books I read, but I know I'm not going to start doing that. All right, next up, let's do the study pair of prompts. Study aesthetic and study style. So, the general study aesthetic and style, but with a vibe, a cool, fashionable vibe. Okay. I don't have a lot of books set at schools. I don't read a lot of that. Maybe the occasional paranormal romance set in a school. Maybe the occasional dark academia. I work in education. I get enough of it in my day-to-day life. I don't read it a lot. And in general, I don't care about a lot of high school drama books. So this one was a little bit tricky. And for the study aesthetic plane, I decided to go with a more generalized idea of studying outside of a school setting, and I picked one of my favorites, which is Crocodile on the Sandbank by Elizabeth Peters. This is the first book in the Amelia Peabody series, which is a series all about technically murder mysteries, but done by, or investigated by, rather, they're not committing the murders, by Amelia Peabody and her eventual husband, as they are archaeologists in Egypt. And they are like actively studying things, going into pyramids, reading hieroglyphics, looking through pottery. They name drop a lot of ancient pharaohs. Like, they know their stuff. Their son is a kid genius when it comes to like translating hieroglyphs. There is a lot of studying vibes in this. The couple and their eventual son are in love with Egypt and studying it, and they just so happen to regularly get caught up in murder mysteries because they cannot go on an expedition, or they cannot have a new exhibit come to the London Museum without someone somehow ending up dead in weird ways. And Amelia, every time it happens, has to investigate it because, like, obviously. And I put this as just plain study aesthetic and not study style because Amelia very famously hates style. She does not care anything for Victorian fashions. Neither does her husband. They are more begrudgingly following the traditional fashions of their day, but much prefer being super dirty and windblown out in the desert. So I figured this would work for distinctly non-fashionable study aesthetic, but it is one of my favorite series. I think I'm on book 6 or 7. It's one of those series where as a kid or as a teen, I would like find it in the library and read random parts throughout the series because technically they are each standalone murder mysteries. So you will, read it and get the murder solved by the end of the book. But you are following Amelia's life from the first book where she's a single woman to, I think, the last book she's a grandma. So I want to follow that. I got a long way to go. There's a lot of books. Currently where I'm at, her son is still a child. So I am looking forward to reading more of it. I know some of the things that happen in the future just because of basic books I picked up. And in general, I would highly recommend this one. I know it is kind of a niche fandom type thing. Like, I do follow a Team Ramesses Elizabeth Peters fan account on Twitter. Like, they exist, but it's definitely niche. But if you like ancient Egypt or Victorian murder mysteries, that one is probably going to be right up your alley. Up next is study style, academic stuff, but with a fashionable flair. Okay. Again, I don't read a lot of school-based stuff, so I picked one of the few dark academia books I've read and loved. And you may be thinking to yourself, Margaret, dark academia is an aesthetic. Couldn't that theoretically come up if you ever tried to do this again? Yes. And if that happens, we'll do something about that bridge when we get there. But regardless, for right now, I am going to talk about Written by Catherine Moon. This is the first book in the Librarian'S Coven series, a series all about a polycule forming of magic users, and they all work at a university. You have Joanna the librarian, Callum the historian, Isaac the artist, and Aiden the musician, and all of their magic is somehow related to their field of study. Like how Callum will study the history of different kinds of magic and essentially bring back to light specific kinds of magic thought lost, and Isaac uses his art for it, and Aiden uses his music for his magic, and just in general there's a lot more focus on the flair of magic within the academic setting. And I believe the general vibe aesthetically of the setting is supposed to be 1940s, maybe. And there's a lot more talk about the clothing. There's a lot more talk about dressing up. Several points, characters are like purposefully dressing their best, and just the general vibe of the setting there's a lot more emphasis on not just the fact that it's academic, but also that it kind of has a vibe. Even when things start to go wrong and they have to fight the big bad over the course of 4 books, there's just a lot more emphasis on people and things being cool looking or hot. That makes it sound really shallow. I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying, comparing this book to Crocodile on the Sandbank, like, the people of this book in general are more put together cosmetically than the characters in the Amelia Peabody series are, for the most part. Like, in that series, they are only dressed the way they absolutely have to be considered respectable and not an iota more. Whereas here, they're having fun dressing up and looking good and enjoying it. So it was the only way I could differentiate steady aesthetic and steady style. And I did not realize there could be such nuances in aesthetics. I mean, I am cottagecore for the most part, maybe a little bit cottagecore hippie, that crossover. But this is confusing, but also kind of fun. So let's keep going. Up next, let's go witchcore. This one felt kind of basic because it's like, okay, I'll just find a book with witches. I've read plenty of those. But how do I pick which one? And I did notice that the description of this aesthetic talked about old buildings. And so I was like, aha, we'll go with Shadows by Kristen Proby. This is the first book in a trilogy all about a trio of sister witches as they fall in love with apparently their soulmates, and this is very necessary because the big bad that they have fought in a previous life is coming back and they need all 6 of them together to do the thing. I read all 3 books. I don't remember exactly what the thing they did to stop the big evil was. But I distinctly remember that, yes, it was a previous lives thing. And the reason I brought it up because of old buildings is the protagonist of the first book. Her job is leading nightly historic tours in New Orleans. So she's literally going to old buildings and talking about them at night. So darkness, old buildings, you see the vibe. And her sister does things with potions and magic. And yes, I believe at least part of one book takes place on Halloween, obviously. But that also feels kind of basic for a book about witches. Like, it's not like they're asking for a book about witches on Imbolc, right? So I did like this series. It almost felt slightly fated mates or slightly true mates, because it is talking about soulmates, and it's soulmates with a purpose. So I guess you could consider that embolden or uplifting the witch theme, because they quite literally need to fall in love to become stronger to defeat the big bad. So they are being uplifted, I guess. Let's go with that. I do recall there's also a lot of talk of them overcoming childhood trauma. Their mother was abusive, and they discover, slight spoilers here, that there was actually a supernatural reason that their mother was the way she was. So there is a lot of that kind of uplifting in, recovering from trauma. So I think we're going to go with that one. I do have plenty of other witch books on hand if a witch type theme comes up, although I'm not quite sure how I would do a witch theme with the other suffixes, because the suffixes still kind of confuse me. But we'll go with it. We'll go with that one for now. And we're going to end with the one that gave me the most problems. Because at first, when I read Rainbow Pop and I really started looking into it, my knee-jerk reaction was cyberpunk, but hopeful. Like a world that has a lot of technology with bright, flashing colors, rave vibes, internet visuals, but the protagonist, doesn't hate on that stuff. Maybe something like that. But the problem is, I apparently don't read a lot of cyberpunk. Thought I did. Realized not the case. I don't know. I think I've bought a lot of cyberpunk novels secondhand and then never end up reading them. But that's not going to help me. And space operas only goes so far. They don't do a lot with internet visuals. And so I'm like, okay, let's just go with the lots of colors glowing. And also, it needs to be something that is the center point of the story. So it can't just be a thing where the colors are there. The colors need to be like a focal point for some reason. Stick with me here because this is the recommendation I am the least confident about. But for this one, I picked Fairy Fruit by Charlotte E. English. This is a book that I found off of BookBub. I've actually found several of this author's books for free off BookBub. And for some reason, I don't know why, I always enjoy my time more or less when I read these books. And then I remember next to nothing of them after. This has happened multiple times with Charlotte English books. Don't know why. It might be the vibe. Because this is all about a borderline fairy tale, or maybe a fairy tale retelling about this village that has been having problems with their orchards. They've been going completely barren for a while, and then suddenly they start growing this brightly colored, nearly glowing fruit, and everyone's confused. They're kind of happy because it tastes good, but they're also concerned because the fae, and there's a whole lot of talk. And I do remember, as I'm speaking about this, that there is a character that is distinctly colorfully dressed, and the color of his dress makes him stand out, so people take note of him. It was one of the only books looking through where the strangely colored things were the focal point, because I looked at a lot of books that had some level of bright colors in this story's setting for one reason or another, but for the most part they were always set dressing on the edges. This is the only one I could think of that would fit the pop suffix of rainbow pop, where it was the point and not just the set dressing, if that makes sense. If you can come up with a better book for this one, please put it down in the comments, because again, I am not at all sure about this choice. I literally was just scrolling through the entirety of my books on Goodreads. Every book that I've ever logged to Goodreads, hundreds, scrolling through, desperately trying to find one in which brightly colored things were the center of attention. I do love this, though. I don't want to make it sound like this has been drudgery. It's just really funny because I was so confident that I could come up with something for rainbow pop, and then I discovered that the genre I thought I read a lot of, I actually don't. And I think the reason that I don't read a lot of cyberpunk is because so many of the protagonists are broody, and I struggle with broody protagonists because I am basically a Shel Silverstein poem given corporeal form, so brooding doesn't vibe with the way my brain works, and I wanted something that was a lot more hopeful when it came to the internet glowing light imagery than a lot of cyberpunk protagonists. If you do know of someone that's in a cyberpunk novel and is pro bright colored internet imagery, please let me know. I would be interested in that recommendation. But Fairy Fruit, despite the fact that I literally cannot remember how it ended, something with the fae, maybe something in a different land. I remember so little. I do remember the imagery of the fruit very well, and the bright colors and the colors of everything beginning to change in the village, and that being the center point of the story. And that's why we went with that one. And now I am finally done. In conclusion, this was a little bit more frustrating than I was expecting. I definitely thought that it would be not easier necessarily, but simpler to at least nail down the kind of book I was looking for. And it does occur to me that while I read a very wide range of books, I don't necessarily read from every single genre, and some of these aesthetics, even when I was doing it on my own to test it, some of the aesthetics are very clearly geared towards specific genres. So I might play around with this in the future. I definitely want to do this again. This was a lot of fun even while being frustrating or a little bit difficult, because it like literally forced me to go through like the entirety of the books I've read and think about things. And I don't usually do that with books that I either haven't reread or didn't review. So it was a kind of fun memory exercise in that way, where I had to like sit and try to think and try to remember that book that I'd read years ago. And I wasn't fully successful. You may note that there were several books in which I never even tried to say the name of any of the characters. That was on purpose. So let me know if you enjoyed this, if you would want to try it yourself. I will, again, that link to the aesthetic generator will be down in the description. You can try it for yourself. Let me know if you get any particularly weird aesthetics, maybe an aesthetic that you actually want to try dressing or decorating a room in, since technically that's what aesthetics are for in the first place. But regardless, thank you so much for watching. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.